Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Costa Brief, to our weekly show about politics. I'm Marcos Melissas. Usually I'm here with Carrie Alavelt, but she is on vacation this week. But don't worry about it. Today I have Simon Rosenberg of Hopium Chronicles joining us. Simon, how are you doing?
I'm great. It's great to be here filling in for Carrie a little bit.
Yeah, Simon has sort of made his name last cycle. He was one of a very small handful of people, Kerry and I included, that were arguing that Democrats were going to do a lot better than expected, and we were doing so not based on any sort of gut feeling or wishful thinking, but based on data and analyzing the actual dynamics of the race. This is a thing that can actually be done. And so at the time, Simon was being accused of hopium, like that it was like he was full of hopium, that his analysis was based on just the hope that Democrats would do well. Turns out the results validated Simon's work, and so he appropriated that slur as his own name for his Substack now. And so I highly encourage everybody to check out his Substack. And his analysis remains as data and reality-based as always. So, Simon, thank you so much. We're going to be talking about the presidential race. And
Well, and I think, Marcos, the other thing I'm well known for is writing the foreword to your first book. I think that, so I think
way
that's
back in the day.
I think, look, that's what put me on the radar screen. And but we've known each other a long time. It's always great to be with you.
So, Simon, thanks for that, Simon. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how panicked should the Democrats be about the presidential race? Because we've been seeing headlines about how panicked everybody is.
I mean, I don't think we should be panicked. I don't think where we want to be, though. Let's be clear about that. But the way I'd like to think about it is that we're the better team. We're tied at the end of the first quarter, or maybe even a little bit ahead. And most of the game is still ahead of us. And then I think as the teams get through the rest of the game, if you want to use a sports analogy, our superior team, our better candidate, our better arguments, our better campaign will trump the activity, the other guys, and that we should win. And what you've seen, I've been on your show quite a bit in the last few years, Marcos, and in this cycle, one of the things I've talked about is that I felt that once that voters started to really pay attention and wake up, that they were going to go through the process of really having to make the choice, and the choice between a pragmatic, successful, hardworking guy, Joe Biden, who's out there every day working for us abroad and at home, and then this other guy who's the ugliest political thing that we've all ever seen, and who's now literally a rapist, a fraudster, a traitor, and a felon. And I think that when people were really forced to make that choice, that things would start to improve for us. And I think there is now some evidence that thank God, by the way, that being, found guilty 34 times for felonies in New York has started to change the election in a positive direction for us, as we would have expected, but you never know in our crazy business, right? Mm-hmm. But so far, the polling over the last, 4 or 5 days, we've now had a series of polls showing Biden gaining 2 to 3 points. It's encouraging, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, that a lot of the narrative after the verdict was announced was that only 10% of Republicans were having doubts about Trump. Only 18% of independents. It was these weird onlys. When you talk about a 50-50 campaign where every point is going to matter, and there's only 7 battleground states that are really going to decide this election. And it just blew me away, because this race will be decided on points. And Simon, Carrie and I keep coming back to your 55% idea. And I don't remember if it had a name, 55% project, but the notion that right now Democrats are about 51 to 52% of the electorate. And so they have a 2 to 4 point majority over Republicans. And really, all you have to do is shift that 3 points. If we could get to 52 to 55, then we're talking a 10-point spread.
Yeah.
So, and then you have more room to maneuver, more room to breathe, and more room for maybe lower turnout or maybe a campaign scandal, those sort of things. And so we're talking 1 point here, 1 point there. That matters. And if we're talking about 10% of Republicans, and nobody thinks the case is going to cost them 10% of the Republican vote, but if it costs them 1 to 2%, that is catastrophic for the Trump campaign.
Look, he lost the last election. And Republicans have been losing elections all over the country since Dobbs happened in the spring of 2022. I mean, we are the stronger party here, and they have to grow. They have to make gains. And so any kind of erosion in his coalition is devastating because and I think that, one of the things I tweeted about today was that it is surprising to me that a lot of the discussion in politics has been about whether it was appropriate for Biden to run and what a risk Democrats were taking with Biden. And yet, he had been a successful president. He was the most experienced guy to ever be in that office in all of American history. He had proven that he could make things better. Whereas we've had very little conversation about the risk the Republicans are taking by backing a serial criminal whose performance on the stump has become, wild and crazy and Looney Tunes, right? Where he's got the most incredible baggage that any candidate's ever had. His agenda is far more extreme, dangerous, and unpopular. You would be thinking that by this time, now that the polls have started to move, that there's going to become a real conversation inside the country about whether or not the Republicans took a ridiculous risk by getting behind, the worst candidate any of us have ever seen. And I hope that conversation happens because it would be weird for it to have only been about Biden, And so, yes, your point is that I still believe that that the Republican Party has splintered more than people understand and more than current polling is capturing. The resistance from Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney and these Republicans who've split off during a campaign where when they're talking to Republican voters about not voting Republican, that could be another point, 2-3 points. The coalition could further splinter. And so I do think there is a chance that Trump really collapses, right? Like is not, right now things feel like on a knife's edge, right? But I think there's also a 25-30% scenario in this election where his historic awfulness and his criminality and his boorishness and his extremism just becomes this big, ugly ball of ugly, of stuff that voters not just walk away from, but run away from, right? And I think that where we're going to get a lot of help in this is going to come from people like Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney, who I think are going to play a major role in this election in convincing Republicans not to vote Republican. How many that is, it will depend on how hard they work and how hard the Biden campaign works. But, it could be if the Haley vote that we've seen that has splintered off, even if a quarter of the Haley vote, right, stays, doesn't come home for Trump, he can't win the election, right? And so it is going to be, unless something extraordinary happens, right, which is always part of it. So, look, I think that the doomsday scenario for the Republicans is that all of this baggage and all this negativity and this criminality would somehow become the dominant story of the election, just in the way that Dobbs became the dominant story in 2022. I think it's possible we're in the process of seeing that happen right now.
Yeah, my theory has always been to really not worry about the polls until after Labor Day, after the conventions. That's when people tune in. I'm always struck by polling that shows. I remember recently that 18% of Americans think that the decision eliminating Roe v. Wade, was Biden's fault.
Right.
And even Democrats thinking it because it happened during the Biden administration. And most people don't understand how the system works. Right. And how the Supreme Court does and how they were appointed by Trump. And so it's been an education process that's going to take hundreds of millions of dollars of TV ads and a lot of chattering and the debates that are going to be coming up. So
yeah, I mean, there's Marcos, this. I mean, given what you do for a living, is that the ability for people today, because of social media and your phone, to stay checked out, right? Just to not ever check in, is much greater today than probably it's ever been, right? And so we have a lot of people who are really checked out. And when they check in, what are they going to see? And what the people that check in from here on out, the first thing they're going to get to know is that Donald Trump is a serial criminal. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a serious problem for him and the Republicans.
Yeah, and the debate, which is going to happen in a couple of weeks, right?
We think.
I was going to get to that. Carrie and I did a whole show about what a disaster that is for Trump, just how he was outmaneuvered by the Biden campaign. As much as they talk about him being addled and mental deficiencies and cognitive decline and all those things that they say about him. Reality is that they really conned him into it. And then last night, and we're recording this on a Tuesday, so I think it was Monday night, Sean Hannity was trying to lay the foundation about why Donald Trump should back out of this. And really, if the argument is that people aren't really tuned in yet, they don't realize how dangerous Trump is or have forgotten, and they don't realize he's the reason that abortion rights have been eliminated, the sooner we get people tuned in, the better it is for Joe Biden. And that's clearly the Joe Biden campaign decision. And Trump agreed to that debate immediately. He didn't check in with his campaign advisor or anything because maybe he believes the nonsense about cognitive decline. I don't know why he would, but he made what I think is a ginormous strategic miscalculation. So how do you think, if the debate plays out, if it happens, how maybe that might affect the race? And also, what if Trump backs out at the last minute, which is a very real possibility?
I'm skeptical that he's going to show up in June, and they'll come up with some crazy cockamamie thing like he doesn't want to debate unless Robert Kennedy's there or something, how some reason he'll get sick, right, or something, get COVID. And because I think that, think about the first question in the debate, right? Because these are serious journalists, the two people that are running the debate.
Another strategic miscalculation by Trump.
Right. No, Donald Trump, what they bet on by goading him into accepting this is that they accurately, I think, understood that Trump, because of his decline, his cognitive decline, that his impulsivity is much higher than it used to be. He's far less disciplined than he used to be. His talks that he gave, like over the weekend, I mean, these, the sharks and the electric batteries and all this stuff. This stuff is so much wilder.
And just if you're wondering what the context is, there is no context.
There's no context. And that's what I mean. Like, he's so much wilder and out there and further away from the real world than he's ever been. And I think that so I think that's a huge reason why the campaign wouldn't want to do it. But the other reason, right, is just think about what will be one of the first questions, if not the first question, which is, Donald Trump, you're the first person to run for president who's been convicted of 34 felony counts, right? You are an adjudicated rapist. You are a fraudster who swindled more than half, that have been now fined hundreds of millions of dollars by the government. Why should America, this great country, elect somebody with your kind of criminal history of sexual assault, of defrauding the government, of, paying off porn stars? How in the world does he answer that question, right? And I think he didn't show up at any of the Republican primary debates. He didn't show up at the third debate in 2020. I've always been convinced that one of the reasons why the Biden campaign did this is they actually really want to debate him. Like, this is not a ploy, right? They want, and they don't think he's going to do it. And they wanted to expose him bailing in June as opposed to late September, right? When it would be potentially less costly to him. I mean, skipping this debate now will be a very consequential thing in the election, and will be another early point as people are checking in. And I think you're right. I mean, I'm skeptical it's going to happen. And I think the Biden campaign is showing a lot of confidence and strength by wanting these debates, by working to get them, so that he had to agree to them, right? I mean, the whole point was he wasn't going to agree to the presidential debate schedule, right? So there weren't any debates. And they were able to get 2 debates, locked in. I think they were smart. I think if they had tried to do 3 or 4, he would have said no, right? Yeah. And so we'll see what happens. Look, I mean, I think that the reality of Trump's diminishment, his impulse, his wildness, his erratic, performance is going to start to become more of an issue in the election as he starts to campaign more. I mean, he's been locked in a courthouse, right, for many, many weeks. He started a campaign. And what people don't realize is that these kinds of stories and this crazy stuff that came up over the weekend was happening before, but it just wasn't getting a lot of attention because his events weren't getting a lot of attention at that time. It was still very early. But his performance as a public politician is the wildest that we've ever seen. And I think that I think it's another part of the reason why I would much rather be us than them as we head deeper into the election.
Yeah, it's easy for people to sort of tune out the Trump craziness at his rallies because it almost seems surreal. It almost seems not real. Like you got to be making that stuff up. Can't possibly be real. So having him on a debate stage,
Yeah.
losing his composure on questions about criminal conviction and then abortion, having a debate where he has to, where people are not paying attention, and there's even a lot of talk about young people. They don't remember the Trump years because they weren't
Yeah.
politically aware, and so seeing him on stage doing the Trump things, because you're right, he has no impulse control. He sputters nonsense, and seeing that, contrasting that with Joe Biden, I think is incredibly damning. But do you really think that him backing out doesn't have its own cost as well?
It will, but it's probably less of a cost than him showing up, and doing all of his crazy stuff. I mean, I think that the thing that we have to recognize, and the reason why places like Daily Kos matter so much, and Midas Touch, and all this new media that we have, is that traditionally when he makes those kinds of mistakes, the sharks and the electricity, the electric batteries, that stuff doesn't get covered by the mainstream media. The clips they'll show from his rallies will be things that are more in a safe zone about the issues of the day.
Yeah.
But because we now have a more robust media of our own, and the Biden campaign has also built a good digital team,
Hmm.
we're capable of taking these moments and getting these things to be widely seen by millions of people, which was something that we didn't really have the power to do, 8 years ago, 4 years ago. And so I think it's why there's now more penalty and cost to him in his erratic behavior. But just think about, I have this other view. I'll just say this very quickly, is that I also think what's happened to Trump, and I think that the conviction has pushed him deeper into this, is that I describe Trump as, Greg Sargent called it living in Foxlandia, right? Which is
Hmm.
this alternative place where, the economy's in recession, crime is raging, gas prices are higher, not lower, right? All these things that he says that he believes are true or says they're true, which aren't true. And in that place of Foxlandia, he also speaks in this sort of dialect of English that I call MAGA, right? And that when you listen to him talk now, it is very hard for somebody who's not been schooled in kind of the MAGA theory of the
Hmm.
country to even follow what he's saying most of the time, right? Because MAGA has essentially seceded from the modern world and the modern America, or at least Trump has. And I think it's another reason why a 90-minute or 2-hour debate one-on-one with Joe Biden is so dangerous, because there are going to be moments where people are going to be like, what in the world is he talking about, right? And, because he doesn't really inhabit the same information world. He's in a sky is red, sky is blue kind of situation. And so I think this is a fascinating part of what's going to happen here. And if I had to bet my own money, my bet would be he's going to pull out, but we'll see what happens.
And then do you think he just would pull out of all debates altogether and just, I
No, I
mean,
mean, Hannity, by the way, Hannity, you should know that Hannity, on the first night of his show after Trump agreed, he was attacking Jake Tapper and CNN. I describe Hannity as the chairman of the Republican Party, right?
mm,
He is the most powerful political figure in Republican politics. And the
mhm,
chairman of the Republican Party made it very clear on the very first night he was unhappy with this arrangement.
mhm.
And now he's raging again. And his new line is that he's come up with this clever thing, which is that I don't think Donald Trump should debate until after he's officially the nominee, right?
Yeah.
After in July, right? As if again that can pass muster with anybody for outside of their own coalition, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I mean, the fact that Hannity's now sort of exploring a new excuse as opposed to the excuse that he had before, which was that Jake Tapper was going to be mean to Donald Trump, which was essentially what his argument was.
Mhm.
Then there means they're trying to figure out how to get out of this thing. But we'll see. I mean, Trump may say, "F it, I want to go," and then he
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Simon, you brought up the economy a short while ago, and the economy's been sort of this weird dynamic in this election because objectively, by the numbers, it looks pretty good. even with inflation, Americans' buying power has increased because
Yeah.
of raising wages and low unemployment. And yeah, nobody likes to pay more for stuff. So clearly, it creates a bit of, there's that vibe that things aren't going as well because you have to pay more. Even if you make more, you got to
Yeah.
pay more for some
Yeah.
things. And so we've had this sort of vibe session, right? People have called it that, and I think it's a very
Yeah.
good word where people feel worse or more insecure than the numbers would indicate. How do you think that's playing in the election? And is there any
Yeah.
chance that could turn around by
Yeah.
election
Two
day?
things. I think there are two things about that. One is that we have to have more courage, I think, as Democrats to say that the economy is good. The job market's the best since the 1960s, that our recovery from COVID is better than any industrialized country in the world. I mean, we can go down, the uninsured rate is the lowest that it's ever been. We can go down the long list. We can say that all of that is happening and inflation has been too high, right? These both can be true. They don't negate one another, right? They're not fighting with one another. They're both true at the same time. It can be that the economy is better today and by many measures than it's been in 50 years, and inflation is too high, has been too high. And I think we have to find a better way to allow both of these things to be true at the same time. Because
Mhm,
otherwise, if all we're doing is talking about costs and prices, we're not spending any time at all talking to the American people about how much better everything is. And
mhm,
what's important about that is that people actually do know things are better. And I'll give you an example, right? I just in the Wall Street Journal battleground poll they did of the 7 battleground states a few weeks ago, they asked the question, in the last 2 years, have things gotten better where you live, right? In your state. They named the state. They didn't say your towns. They asked Arizona and North Carolina. And an overwhelming majority in all 7 states said that things were better in their state, right?
mm,
And what that meant was that people have an awareness that where they are, things have gotten better. And I think our job then is to say, well, they're better because of Joe Biden and the Democrats. And in
mhm,
5 of these 7 battleground states, we have Democratic governors, many of whom
yeah.
are very popular,
Mhm,
who are going to be able to help us make that case, right? We have a lot of Democratic senators and congressmen and mayors and other officials in these states who can help Joe Biden make that case. And so I think that I think we shouldn't. I think we've been red waved a little bit on the economy, right?
mm.
We've been a little spooked and told, well, that things, you go on Twitter and you got 20 of these bots and trolls saying, I don't know about where you live, but where I am, bacon costs $27 a pound, right?
Right.
And like, and it's like they're not even trying any longer to make sense, right?
Mhm.
They just want, oh, Simon, you elite, you don't understand, where, and then of course, like where they live is not a place, right?
Right.
There's no physical location on their account. They don't say here in Cleveland. They say where I live, right? Which is the dead
Yeah.
giveaway that this is a fake account. I think they've worked the refs on this really hard over the last couple of years. And I think we just have to be courageous to talk truthfully to the American people that Joe Biden's economic stewardship has been among the best of any president in the last 100 years. But not everything has gone exactly the way we wanted, and there's still work to do. And that's what we're going to do in our second term. And I think we've gotten too spooked internally
Mhm.
about making the positive case about the economy because we've been told that if we do that, we're going to alienate voters. And what I think about all the time is, okay, if you're a voter and you're thinking, well, they're saying the economy's doing well, but I'm not doing well. Would you rather know that the economy is doing well because then it makes it more likely that you're going to be doing better, or do you really want to hear that everything is terrible for everybody everywhere? And I think this logic that we've gotten caught up in here, which is that we can't tell people things are good if they aren't feeling themselves,
Mhm.
I just think is wrong. I'm just going to say this. Like, I understand the theory. I think it's wrong because what happens is if we don't make the positive case for ourselves, then they're never going to hear it. And so I think you can't score unless you shoot. Let's go take a lot of shots on goal and we'll go win the election. And so I think we have to be a little bit more aggressive and courageous here to stand by our president who has led the economy. I mean, the Wall Street Journal just had an article where they interviewed and surveyed economists in the United States. And the headline in the Wall Street Journal was the US economy is the envy of the world.
Yeah.
How in the world can we not run on that?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And the argument isn't things are good. If they're not good for you, tough shit. You're out of luck because we're done. This is all we're doing, right? The argument's always like we're working to make it better for the working class to lift all boats. And so,
right.
yeah, if you wrap up, things are good. Maybe it hasn't caught you yet, but we're working on that. We want it good for you too.
I think
Which
there's
is
a fundamental threshold question for every incumbent, which is, did you make things better on your watch? And we have to make that case while
yeah,
also talking about the second term and how Joe Biden will clearly leave the country in better shape over the next 4 years than Donald Trump. These are all things that we can do, right? They're not in opposition to one another. They're not fighting one another. We can do more than one thing at a time, right? We can walk and chew gum, right? But I think, I love hearing commentators who claim that we shouldn't be talking about the last 4 years. What are you talking about? Of
oh my
course we have,
god, yes,
Joe Biden, every incumbent, the basic question is, are we better off? And the answer to that is absolutely. We are far better off as a country because of Joe Biden. We
yeah,
should be loud and proud about that. And whatever aspect of that in your life that the people that are watching and listening,
mhm.
whatever it is about Joe Biden that you think has made things better, own that and talk to that, be passionate about that and talk to your friends about that. We have to work this really hard. Look, we have a better candidate. We have better arguments. We have a
Yes.
better campaign.
Mhm.
We should win this election. But the key, I think, the difference between this being a close election and an election we win with a little bit of comfort is going to be how much work we all do in the coming months. I mean, I think that what Donald Trump wants to do is he wants you to sit it out and to be scared and to not participate and not be an information warrior and not make phone calls and not give money to candidates. Marcos, you've always been a very engaged guy. Your site has always been a forward leaning
Mhm.
warrior site, right? We need that warrior kind of mentality here, in these final months to go win this thing together.
Yeah, I'm picturing our social media person cutting that clip right there. That was absolutely perfect, and I think we're going to end with that because I don't think we can top that. It is going to be a tight election, everybody, and so we're going to need everybody active, moving, doing the things they need to do. We can't leave anything on the table because yes, it is the most important election of our lifetime, but it will continue to be as long as Trump and his MAGA people are in charge of the Republican Party. So we got to do what we need to do. And yes, Simon is right. We have the slight edge. Even 538 debuted their rankings, and they give Joe Biden a 53% chance of winning. Now, Trump has a 47% chance of winning. No, this is not
Can
the
I,
kind of thing. Yeah,
can I just say one thing about that? It's a 53% chance of winning with 40% of the polls being Republican polls, right?
yeah.
That feed into that model. We have to recognize there's an enormous amount of Republican polling in the averages and in the models. And so
And not just Republican polling, but bullshit Republican
yeah, I
polling.
mean, +6, +7, these things that are pushing the averages. And so
Yeah.
the fact that today, given what we all understand to be about the election, that 538 said that it's more likely that Joe Biden wins than Donald Trump was really important for all of us because I believe that to be true, but it's also, this is an independent analyst, right? Using the data that's available to us, concluding that, and the way he gets there, right, is that we're likely to win Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which gets us to 269. And then the battle is to 270. And in my view, and what I'm working on a lot at the Hopium site, is we're very focused on Arizona, North Carolina, and the one, electoral college vote in Nebraska to get us to 270. And so the way I describe it is check in the game of chess is the 269. Checkmate is winning any one of those other three. And I think it's far more likely that that happens for us than it does for them. So, I feel good about where we are, but we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, Simon Rosenberg. You can find him at the Hopium Chronicles on Substack. I really, really recommend it. You can also find him on Twitter, and I think you're also on Threads as well. You're on.
And YouTube, I'm starting to do more videos, which has been
Oh,
kind of
very
fun.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very
yeah, very
fun.
good.
I had a
Yeah,
video that hit 50,000 views the other day. It was a
nice,
milestone for me. So,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah, recommend check him out. All those things. Simon, thank you so much for joining me. Such an incredible It's always so much fun to talk to you and really root that discussion in data, in facts, and numbers, as opposed to the crap that we see bandied about. And thanks to Walter for producing the show. Thanks to Perry for her work behind the scenes. And thanks to everybody who watches, listens, reads Daily Kos, is part of this community, part of this fight and effort to save our country from the forces of MAGA. We could not do it without you, and I could not wish for better allies in this fight. So thank you so very much. Love you all. Catch you all next week. Bye-bye.